Dear ladies and gentlemen here in the room and those who are watching us online, we were informed that we are watched by more than 600 people outside this room, so there is quite an interest in the topic that we are discussing today. And I would like to propose to start the second and same time also the concluding panel of the day that is called NATO and Collective Defense between Reassurance and Deterrence. And my name is Māris Andžāns. I'm a research fellow of the Latvian Institute of International Affairs, and I'm also assistant professor at the Riga Strategic University. And in this panel, we will speak about something that takes most of the interest here in the Baltic states, about the collective defense and Russia. And for that, I think we have quite an excellent list of speakers today. And I will start by introducing them. And on my far right, I have Mr. Jānis Garisons, who is the State Secretary of the Ministry of Defense of the Republic of Latvia. He's a very experienced civil servant. He has served not only for the Ministry of Defense, but he has been also a diplomat. Previously, he has served not only in Latvia, but also outside Latvia. He has worked with different issues, not only the defense and security, but also Russia, CIS, Scandinavia, and other issues. Welcome, Mr. Garisons. Then, on my right, I have Mr. Romuald Ratajczak, who is retired Major General from the Polish Armed Forces and also Doctor of Technical Sciences. And he has a very successful career in his previous professional life, because he has been the military observer in Iraq and Kuwait in the beginning of 90s, and he has also held different posts at the Ministry of Defense of Poland, and he has also been the Rector Commandant of the National Defense Academy. And now he is the advisor to the head of the National Security Bureau of the Republic of Poland, which is advising President Duda now. So welcome, Major General. On my left, you know that usually here in Latvian discussions we used to have two Jānis, Andris or Māris, which are very popular names here, but today we have two Alessandros. We had Mr. Alessandro Marone in the first panel, and now have the pleasure to introduce you to another Alessandro Scheffler, not from Italy, but from Germany, from München. And Mr. Scheffler is lecturer in international politics at the Federal University of Public Administration in Munich, and he's also a member of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung working group on young foreign policy experts. Welcome, Alessandro. And last but not least, on my left, we have Mr. Sergey Kulik from Russia, from Moscow. And Mr. Kulik currently is the Director for International Development at the Institute of the Contemporary Development in Moscow. And he's also a member of the Academic Council of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, and also a member of the Council for Foreign and Security Defense Policy. And furthermore, what I would like to note that Mr. Kulik has been, together with the presidential staffs of the Russian Federation, he has worked both under Mr. Yeltsin and also 2 terms under Mr. Putin. And then he has served the president of the Russian administration, of the Russian Federation administration, also as director of the Department of Relationship with the European Union. And here I would like to say that Mr. Kulik, he represents the mainstream thinking. At least this is what we expect. And for us here in the Baltic states, it's quite important to know what Russia thinks of us, not only what we think of Russia. And we want to hear what Russia thinks, but not what we want to think that Russia thinks of us. So I will stop here, and I would like to start the discussion straight away by giving the floor to Mr. Garisons. And yesterday and the day before, we had the NATO ministerial meeting in Brussels, which prepared the decisions that should be adopted in Warsaw in some 3 weeks' time. Is Latvia satisfied with the decisions taken so far, or do we want for more?
Well, I think what we have to... good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Māris, for introduction. I think what we actually have to recognize that this is a process which has been evolution of alliance and adoption of alliance to the current security environment. What we've seen in Wales was the reaction to the first reaction to events happening in our neighborhood, and then alliance adopting to this environment. And it will take certainly time. And we should not look certainly on something like, after Warsaw everything will be solved. I would say after Warsaw everything will start only because we have we will have political decisions and we will have to implement them. And probably for not many of you it's very clear that when you have political decisions, then military process starts, and then it's very complicated process. You have to staff, force generate, you have to actually solve all logistical issues and things like that. Therefore, it's only the beginning, actually. And if, of course, security, there are more changes in security environment, I certainly sure that NATO will have to adapt even more. But probably what I wanted to raise a few issues, and I will not be very long, as you already had the first panel here and addressed a lot of issues. I think this discussion title was Back to Origin. I think what I would certainly want to avoid this perception that we are going back to Cold War NATO mentality. It's not actually the fact, because neither Russia is Soviet Union, not militarily, not in any other way. Neither those threats are the same. I think there is sometimes false expectation when people talk that, well, we know those threats from the east, but more challenging is threat from the south. No, I would say opposite. Actually, if we would knew those threats from the east, we would probably be not surprised in Ukraine, and we would not be surprised in Syria. Actually, it's what happened. We have to probably be more clear on what we are facing, and we are facing probably more, which is, I believe, more general changes in security in international system, because since Crimea, I think the international system is such changing. And we have to, like we are not, but we are moving into a completely new era of international relations. Where we will end, I don't think we know. But what we will face surprises, we will face deceptions, we will face attempts to disable us or our decision makers. And therefore, we have to take into account that. And of course, the NATO process has been, I would say, very productive, and we have been very satisfied with the outcome. And hopefully, I think already now we know that for 98%, what has been proposed in NATO Defense Ministerial will be adopted in Warsaw. And that is the military part. We will have a battalion task group in each of Baltic countries and in Poland. And that, I think, is a change, is complete posture of NATO, because now we are moving to forward defense. And you know why we are moving there, because that environment. What another thing what we have to look more, I think that is national forces, because sometimes, and I like always quote Rand this simulation, which said about 72 hours Baltics will be conquered. Well, if you assume that Baltics are desert of Iraq, and if you assume that Baltics don't have any indigenous forces, then probably yes, 72 hours. But we are not desert. Our geography is very complicated, and actually it will not be 72 hours, I can you promise. Therefore, our national forces will play a very important role, and we're putting enormous emphasis now on development of national forces, and decentralizing weapons, decentralizing territorial basis of our national guards and things like that. And therefore, that will complement Allied presence, forward deployed presence. And of course, we have to take into account all those issues like nuclear strategies and missile defense. On political side of the house for Warsaw, I think it's more or less, I would say, the more bigger challenges, because we so far have not acknowledged, there is no political discussions on where we actually, what will be our strategy. And I think, I at least hope that in Warsaw this discussion will follow what is our strategy both for East and for South, because we now have military solution, but we have to also be clear on our policy. NATO-Russia Council, well, I know you probably heard that a lot of talks about that we have to keep with this as our discussion format. Well, Russia violated several times already this framework, and I'm not sure that this actually is the right framework anymore. It lost already. It failed basically previously, this framework, and why we think it will work in the future. But we have to think more about incident management, because that is something what actually is very important. And of course, in general, as I said, strategies for both for East and South are we have to have those political discussions in Warsaw. What will be actually our policies and how we pursue them? But as I said at the beginning, Warsaw will be only the beginning of the process and not the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garisons. And if I may, a short question right away. 1,000 men, many ask, is it enough? Well, you see, it's like you always can say it's not enough, we need more, but I think at this point I would say it's enough because you know, there is a whole system of NATO which has been changed, including rapid reaction forces and things like that. And of course, what is important that nobody talks about only, you know, bringing flags here. Those battalions will be actually fighting units, and they will be capable of fight. And of course, as I said, you have to take into account that we have our own forces as well. Don't forget that. Thank you. We will not forget that. And now let's turn to Major General Ratajczak. Warsaw, a very symbolic place for a summit, because we hosted here in Riga a NATO summit in 2006. It was the first time that a NATO summit was held on the soil of the former Soviet Union, but Warsaw seems somehow to be more symbolic, as the Warsaw Pact of 1955 also bear the name of Warsaw. And this time, many said that this will be a historic summit, that many decisions will be taken. What is Poland expecting from the summit, and is Poland satisfied with what is expected to be decided there? General.
Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I refer immediately to what you have said about a certain symbolic meaning of Warsaw Summit. To add to this, I say that to say the dinner of the head of states and government will be in the same place when the Warsaw Treaty Agreement was signed. I think this is something really very symbolic. In the very same place, in the very same room, under the very same chandeliers. But let me express my sincere thanks to all the organizers for inviting me to take part in this discussion. This is, for me, something very symbolic. Almost 20 years ago, in December 1996, here in Riga, I attended the conference, NATO and the Baltic States, Quo Vadis, organized by the Konrad Adenauer Foundation and the Latvian Institute of International Affairs. I'm not sure whether anybody else from that time is in this room. Looking at the young faces, I assume that probably not. But I would say that some issues then discussed and some questions then asked are still relevant. Maybe not to the extent of having déjà vu, but some elements are really very similar. And to prove this, at least to a certain extent, I will mention about two RAND Corporation reports. In 1996, the RAND Corporation report was published, prepared by Ronald Asmus and Robert Narek, NATO enlargement and the Baltic states. And this year, spring this year, another RAND report was published, reinforcing deterrence on NATO eastern flank. And so you see, and it means that there is a still discussion on Baltic states, but on a different level. Then it was ahead of NATO, ahead of NATO enlargement and the inclusion of Baltic states, but now is the discussion for Baltic states as NATO members. But I will quote, I will extend my presentation by 1 minute, but I will quote a sentence from the first RAND report from 1996. If mishandled, the Baltic issue has the potential to derail NATO enlargement, redraw the security map in northeastern Europe, and provoke a crisis between the West and Russia. And change only one word: enlargement for cohesion. And this would sound like, if mishandled, the Baltic issue has the potential to derail NATO cohesion, and then it follows. It means that the sentence is almost the same. But coming back to how to say, to the hectic time ahead of NATO summit, and we all try to find answers to the question, how should NATO evolve? And in my opinion, we should look at the deliverables from NATO summit in Warsaw from a little bit broader perspective. That would I describe as from Wales through Warsaw and beyond. Not only just at this period and concentrating only what would happen or what will happen in Warsaw. And looking at NATO's history, it's clear that from the very beginning NATO had been in a process of permanent transformation. And it is something natural for a vibrant and living organization. And as I understand, ability to transform is simply embedded in NATO's DNA. NATO is capable of transforming. It was mentioned here about some few funerals of NATO announced in the meantime. And the historic changes in our part of Europe led to the change in NATO, and NATO entered this second phase in its history, the post-Cold War era, and the internal evolution of the alliance was driven by the phrase already mentioned here, out of area or out of business. And this reflected the mood that we will live in the everlasting peace, maybe with some minor unrest on the peripheries. And after several years, referring to the popular saying about NATO Three Basics mission during the Cold War, to keep Russians out, some, including Poland, started to raise concerns that Russians are coming back, actually. And of course, we were often accused of being Russophobic. The events in Ukraine brought a change in this, and all the strategic assumptions of the post-Cold War era were challenged, and NATO finally recognized that Russians are not only coming back, but actually they are like Hannibal, already ante portas. Whatever it means, I mean, it's of course a symbolic phrase. The post-Cold War era was over. The Newport summit marks this turning point, and some measures, military measures, were agreed in Newport. The summit in Wales was a turning point from phase 2 to phase 3 in NATO history, the post-Cold War era, after post-Cold War era, the third phase. And the NATO summit reacted with these unexpected developments with then existing procedures and measures. It is why the summit in Warsaw is it's so important. After 2 years from summit in Wales, we have much clearer picture and better understanding of nature and complexity of changes in the security environment. In Warsaw, we have to review the status of implementation of decisions taken in Wales, and it's obvious that the military dimension, and it's going on actually, must respond to the need of reinforcing eastern flank and at the same time to improve capabilities of NATO to react to the challenges coming from the east. And evolving NATO must bring full spectrum of deterrence and defense. This must be a key deliverable from Warsaw. And in this respect, the alliance must move beyond the readiness action plan, especially on the eastern flank. This must include the forward deployment. The decision has been taken and then will be adopted or approved at the Warsaw summit. And from the Polish perspective, from the Polish perception of security, we attach a high importance to the visual, preferable permanent presence, and it would be some kind of a response to the question you asked. This is something symbolic, the proof, the token of the cohesion and determination of the alliance. Sometimes such a presence is called a tripwire. But it's important that this tripwire is attached on the other side to a proper mechanism. And this enhanced forward presence must be military meaningful in a size and structure. This must be multinational, but with ability to plug and fight. This must not be. This shall not be simply a collection of units put into the bowl by different nations. The presence must be coherent with NATO's activities on the eastern flank, embedded in operational planning, and of course sustainable. And as far as the and of course this deterrence posture, its character and nature and strength must be politically and strategically and militarily viable, because any wrong decision can be very costly in the future. For a dilemma, presence versus deployment as a deterrence, let's have a look at the potential deployment of VJTF, Very High Readiness Joint Task Force. When VJTF is deployed early, on time, it can deter the crisis and can prevent the crisis. But it's when we have a delayed deployment, it can be seen as some kind of an escalation, that NATO escalates by deployment of the forces. But with late deployment of VJTF, that can lead to the situation that forces are left with no option but to fight. This means simply that the deterrence failed. And in conclusion, it seems to be obvious that meaningful forward presence is crucial, but this must be supported by or based actually on the national defense forces. According to the rule, a strong one, it's easier to be defended by the others. And really, in summary, let me make some kind of a comparison to illustrate the changing nature of military capabilities of the alliance and some directions to the future. During the Cold War, in the phase one of NATO existence, the military posture of the alliance resembled a heavy fist, organized, structure, and prepared to defend its members against Soviet threat, a strong fist capable to punch the well-known enemy. During the phase two in NATO history, the post-Cold War, NATO military capabilities started to look like an open and flexible hand, suited rather to make a subtle tweak and to play various instruments and tunes with different partners. A hand rather ready for a handshake or a slap, but not a blow. In the phase three, the phase we are facing, as a result of our decisions taken in Warsaw, at least in some areas, an evolving NATO must come to its roots. While preserving its cohesion and flexibility, the alliance should remain as an open hand for friends and partners, but its military posture must be transformed into a powerful hand, fully capable of clenching into a robust fist when situation requires. And answering to or addressing to the question, NATO must return to its main raison d'être, collective defense, but this cannot be a simple U-turn or a withdrawal, but this should be a carefully planned process along an ascending spiral. It means NATO should find itself on the or over the very known territory. I would say that this process could be called back to the future, not back to the origins, but back to the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ratajczak. As you exceeded your time, you will not get a question from me right away. So I will turn now to my left, and Alessandro Scheffler from Germany. Germany has not always been considered as the best friend of the Baltic states in the European Union and NATO. When it came to the accession talks to NATO, it was probably Germany that maybe had some doubts again about strengthening the defense architecture of the Baltic states. Again, there were some rumors that Germany was maybe objecting in a way. But now, as we understand from the public sources, that we will have these 4 fighting battalions, and that one of them will be led by Germany. So what's happening in Germany? How Germany perceives the situation here at the Baltics? Welcome.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would contradict the first point. Germany has always been a very good friend of the Baltic states, but there have been differences to how security in Eastern Europe is best achieved. And it used to be a German mantra that security is not achieved against Russia. And in my remarks, I will try to, you have mentioned that we actually all quite surprised by the actions that Germany have taken, how far we have come. I personally have argued 2014 with papers, well, can we maybe forward station 1 battalion NATO-wide? And that even in late 2014, after Wales seemed still quite inachievable. So we have come quite far, but I will try to center my remarks on how far is Germany likely to go? When will it shout stop? What is too much deterrence? And where do we go too much into confrontation? I will try to make 3 points and stay short with them. The first is that the German view of Russia has changed for the foreseeable future. The second point of view is that also the German view of itself and of its role in the European and transatlantic security architecture has changed and will likely remain like this in the future. And thirdly, despite these changes, Germany will still remain hesitant to implement the kind of very strong deterrence that some of its Eastern allies wish for. In particular, it will be very difficult to engage in what we might term as deterrence by denial, rather than other concepts. This is not because of a often mentioned German Pacific mindset, or because of sentimentality vis-à-vis Russia, but rather simply a question of strategic concerns, whether a strategy of deterrence by denial is actually possible, and whether or not steps taken towards a strategy of deterrence by denial might actually invoke an escalatory spiral and lock in the conflict for the foreseeable future. So let's start with the German perspective on Russia, with which ties have traditionally been close. You all have heard about Ostpolitik, which is one of the defining narratives of German foreign policy successes in the past, particularly for the Social Democrats. And particularly after the Cold War, Germany has sought a political partnership with Russia because it was a German mantra, and it continues to be a German mantra until today, that we cannot achieve security in Europe against Russia. This traditional German position has, to a degree, though, changed. While proponents of a close relationship with Russia still exist, they are nowadays mostly in the economic realms. So political proponents of the partnership with Russia have been quite marginalized in the discourse. Some have died, like good old Egon Bahr. And so the pro-Russia camp is redefining itself in the moment. But in the economic parts, the discussions still exist, and if somebody wants to bash me about Nord Stream 2 later on, I don't support it, so there's no point to it. So it's absolutely clear that the political partnership with Russia is quite dead for the moment. By positioning itself against the European Union and also explicitly against the value system that the European Union represents, Russia has forced Germany to step up and to leave its classical self-perceived role as a mediator between Russia and Germany's, I will not call it Russophobic, I will call it less Russophile allies. And particularly the engagement with populist parties in Germany, but also elsewhere, and intensive activity by Russian media, might have heard about the LIIA case in Germany, have made it sure that Germany finds itself somewhat unwillingly in an antagonism with Russia, and particularly the antagonism between the two leaders has been stressed, particularly by the media, I think, quite a lot. But Germany's view of itself has also changed. The weakness of the traditional pillars of the European security system, such as France or Britain, France being engaged elsewhere, Britain being somewhat self-centered, has forced Germany to take more action and to make more significant contributions. We don't see that only in Eastern Europe, we see it also elsewhere. And in some way, Germany has been locked into the approaches as taken in the Ukrainian crisis, because at the beginning, Germany took this traditional role as a mediator, and the White House was nice enough to give it some role in taking that step. But it was also clear that for taking a diplomatic stance, for keeping up the NATO-Russia Founding Act, Germany had to provide some counterbalance, and thus agreed to and actually play an active role in the reassurance of its allies. Now, the German side might have hoped that the VJTF will be enough, it will not be permanently stationed, it will be stationed in Europe, and actually the conflict might boil down at some point, and then we can walk away from this whole mess. Unfortunately, that has not been the case. The problems of the VJTF, we talked about the problems about deploying it, have soon made clear that it is not enough to provide credible reassurance, and so Germany actually found itself having to think through the thoughts itself started, and thus to follow up with the commitments it has made to this day. But I would say that this support has limits. Germany clearly is against suspending the NATO-Russia Founding Act. It clearly is against suspending the sessions of the NATO-Russia Council. So actually, you know that Germany is lobbying hard to have another council before the Warsaw Summit. And any attempts to achieve that will create strong German counteraction, because Germany really wants to keep up a channel where we give Russia an opportunity to opt out of the spiral of confrontation. And I don't think that will change for the foreseeable future. But the general has also alluded to it, it is also the case that even the military planners just don't think that we can achieve a deterrence by denial. That is, Russia, due to its geographical proximity, will always have more troops close to the border. And we can thus not create a counterbalance against this RAND report was mentioned, which fabulated about the amounts of European and American troops that we would need to stop an attack, a large-scale attack by Russia. From a German perspective, that's not a viable perspective to go, because no matter how much you bring in, you will always be outmatched. In particular, the geographical position of Kaliningrad and the strategic problems that arise from that in terms of access, in terms of area denial, these are problems you cannot solve by simply putting more troops in. And so maybe the German perspective can be summarized as how many British soldiers do you need to defend France? Just one. You know, it's a good old saying. So the outlook for German policy inside NATO, I think it's easy to assume that as long as Russia maintains its confrontative stance, we can expect Germany to play along the current strategy. After all, it was also never an enthusiastic endorser of crisis management. The current approach even promotes the German framework nation concept, because the Germans sponsored that idea in the beginning. But too much deterrence will be as feared, and actually the German concentration is now on making the structure effective in the long run. The German defense chief has said it will actually take about 10 years until we have transformed our structures back from the crisis management mode they are back in now into something that can provide effective deterrence. At the same time, there also exists, and this is the last point I make, then I close, there also exists a high risk of spillover of tensions from other policy domains. As an example, the German public perception of the Eastern European states has suffered heavily from Eastern Europe's refusal to accept refugees, and thus from a lack of solidarity, or a perceived lack of solidarity, at a time when the countries on the eastern flank were themselves demanding the solidarity of Germany in its fears about Russia. Similarly, a fear of increasing illiberal tendencies in some allied countries could have a cooling effect on their relationship with Germany. The speakers before have mentioned that NATO is a community of values, and so the value of the alliance will also decline if it becomes less of a community of values. And with that, I would close.
Vielen Dank, Alessandro. So comprehensive that I do not even have a question, but I hope the public will have. And so last but not least, Mr. Sergey Kulik, you have heard what we here in the Baltics think about Russia, but what Russia thinks about the Baltic states. What can we expect after the Warsaw summit if these battalion-sized units are deployed here in the Baltics and the Poland? What should we look forward from the East?
Thank you, but I use a privilege to be the last speaker and take into account some accent made in the previous discussion, and also your command to use to pay attention, and certainly to the Baltic question from the point of some touchy points for Russia. The first thing that I like the message of Her Excellency, the Polish ambassador, about the comprehensive study of the Russian policy, the need of this, because there is a lack of such comprehensive and preferably unbiased study, including the policy of the Baltic states and the decision to be made during the NATO summit. In this study, I think that there is a need to take into account the problems and the prospects of the military planning and military budgeting system in Russia. You and we are talking a lot about the exercises, the military budget increase in Russia, the increase of the military influence, and so on. But all these prognosis and discussions are stuck to the year of 2020. If you look at different figures and plans, you would find a blind spot after 2020, because all our military budgeting system and military planning is stuck to this, and depending on economic and other trends in Russia. So some negative signals from the NATO, including during the summit, will stimulate some internal forces to speed up and to avoid uncertainty about the future budget allocations and the military planning. Now we have a struggle between two models of the future development in Russia. One is so-called mobilization model, representative by the economic advisor to the president, Mr. Glazyev, and another is market reforms, representative by Alexei Kudrin. Our institute works closely with Alexei Kudrin. He also published in his Committee on Civic Initiatives our reports, including the foreign policy, and so on. So now there is a struggle, and Mr. Kudrin now in this economic committee of the president, and I hope, Māris, we would be in the mainstream in this area. So all the signals, and not mainly that you will reach 2% of GDP for military budget and so on, but some other moves would make different signals on this threshold, which now Russian stands. So this decision, particularly in the NATO, not only one of the important and main blocs, but also the irritator, traditional irritator to the Russian elite and Russian people, would make some positive or negative signals in this development. The second thing I want to mention about the cybersecurity, which is quite important. In particular, you have a center in Estonia that deals with mainly also with the Baltic states. You could criticize the Russian behavior in Ukraine as a break of international legal regime and so on. But if you look at the cyber thing, you don't have the international legal regime, and there is nothing to abrogate. For example, if you have a cyber attack, and allegedly sponsored by one state, again bank systems and so on, you have to respond. For example, the United States will respond with a military thing, but it will be out of international regime. There is no. We have a lot of think about traditional security architecture and international regime, but we don't have any cyber thing. Here, I think this is one of the important and underestimated threats, not only in the relations between Russia and the West and NATO, but also on the worldwide security. Here, I think that in decision of NATO, and it's very difficult to have some effective channels between Russia and NATO in this area so far, I hope. But this decision shouldn't hamper the bilateral communications between different countries, major countries, and Russia, like we have with the United States. We resumed this cyber dialogue on critical infrastructure. So this is very important to have some communication between cybersecurity. Here I want again stress one thing, that Russia is very capable, unlike some other technological thing. And the second, please don't forget that Russia is the victim of 70 million major hacker attacks. But at the same time, the United States and China have 3 a year, but the United States and China have 3 million per day. So we are in the better position, and we can cooperate. The other thing, the third point, is about the enlargement. Frankly speaking, as I understand, we get the policy of Baltics in NATO and so on. For us, the new very touchy point is the position of Sweden and particularly Finland. So Finland, according to our consensus, would not be the member of the NATO. But even the trend in the public opinion is very important and very touchy point, including our policy in the Baltic Sea. And also very touchy point is the trends in Germany, because Germany, as I work with our president in his previous time, Germany is a sacred cow. So this turbulences in Germany is very touchy, and the position of Germany in NATO is a very important thing. That's why there is a lot of stuff about the White Book, Project White Book, of the German Defense Ministry, with misinterpreted as Russia as an enemy. So this is a very touchy thing. So my time is limited, so I would better answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kulik. So maybe right away, a question from my side, and then I'll turn to the audience. The force that we are expecting now in the Baltic states, battalion-sized combat units in each of the Baltic states and Poland, how will Russia react? What can we expect? We have heard the plans about 3 new divisions in the Western Military District of Russia, but could you please give some views on what could we expect now on the behalf of the Russian Federation after the Warsaw Summit?
This is a very touchy, and again I use this word touchy, and important trend, because I have said we have get accustomed with Baltic state membership in NATO, but we have more problems traditionally with Estonia than with Latvia, despite of this the Russian minority question, particularly in Latvia. But the permanent stationing is was very touchy thing. But the main point, so the decision to make, the main point, as Alessandro rightly said about the Founding Act. So Founding Act is a kind of a sacred, also like Germany, it's a sacred cow for Moscow, and that depends on the size of these deployments, which could be directly interpreted as the abrogation of the Founding Act.
Thank you, Mr. Kulik. And now it's the questions time. We have some questions also already from online, as we are being watched by a few hundred of people online, but we'll give the opportunity to ask the questions here in the audience, and then I will add those questions if they will not be asked here in the audience. So the floor is yours, and I see one of our previous speakers, Mr. Kulesha, in the first row. Please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for very rich presentations. If you allow me 3 questions in one intervention, but to different speakers. First, to Mr. Garisons, you mentioned the issue of preventing the incidents, which is something very close to the heart of my organization, European Leadership Network, and we did put forward some proposals regarding the incidents in the air and also transparency. But at the same time, it seems that the NATO-Russia Council would be one of the most important venues to talk about the incidents and the way to prevent them. So you mentioned the incidents and the dangers they bring, but you also mentioned that the NATO-Russia Council may not be the best thing right now, or the best thing for the future. So how do you square these two? And if not at NATO-Russia Council, then are we talking about bilateral agreements or bilateral contacts with Russia about these incidents? Are we talking about OSCE or any other mechanisms to use? Then to Alessandro, I think Germany doesn't get the credit it needs to get because a lot of people either choose to ignore this change that is happening in Germany, or they think that this change is very superficial, and sooner or later Germans will go back to the good old Russia first policy. So I'm happy that you confirmed that this is a change that won't be reversed easily. And you put the limits of the German reaction. But what's on the Russian side could push Germany actually to move the red lines regarding these limits? Because it seems to me that Germany thinks that what will be agreed in Warsaw will be enough, and we will move towards stabilization of the relationship. But what measures which Russia can take would change the German calculus? Are we talking about Iskanders in Kaliningrad? Are we talking about getting out of the INF treaty? What could trigger a reassessment of the German situation? And finally, to Mr. Kulik, you mentioned that there is this debate between the different models in Russia, which camp do you think will win ultimately? Because it seems that we know that the arguments about NATO will be used, but there are also powerful arguments on the other side, saying that regardless of NATO's policy, Russia actually needs closer relationship with the European Union and needs to do something about the sanctions. So which camp do you think has better arguments and will prevail in the Kremlin?
Thank you very much for the question. Let's gather some more questions. I see Mr. Webel in the front row. Estonia would like to say something.
Thank you. I have a much simpler question about deterrence. It's more for the Baltic and Polish panel. It reminds me the yes Prime Minister from BBC that the Russians will be deterred, and then the scientists ask why. But I will ask differently. I will ask when or by which criteria. Because we talk a lot about deterrence, but can you give me some living example how to make, for example, Mr. Kulik be scared about the West? Because if I look at the banner, he looks most confident. So what could you do against Russia or against any of them that make them think twice before being preemptive or too active? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I see one hand up right behind. Please introduce yourself.
Artur Zbikovs, Reassurance University student. And my question is mostly about what is going on right now in the United States of America and will going on in Germany. And I'm talking about presidential elections. So basically, no one has mentioned anything about this, and I think it's an important topic to talk about, to discuss about. It's of course Donald Trump and his potential presidency, and taking into consideration that he's a kind of an isolationism policy provider, foreign policy, and he's talking about NATO in other way that we do here. My question is, will NATO policy and will NATO somehow change under the presence of the Donald Trump in the United States? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. I see there is one hand up right behind.
Hello. To Mr. Ratajczak, is this right? You named 3 phases, Cold War, post-Cold War, but you didn't name the third, which is now?
After post.
There is no definition? Okay. And the second question is to Mr. Kulik. Are there going to be tanks here? Should we be afraid of that?
Thank you for the question. And is there the very last question that somebody wants to ask here in the audience? The last option, I assume, today. So if there's not any other single hand raised, I will ask one more question that has been received online, and this is to Mr. Garisons about the compulsory service in Latvia. You know that I have been advocating this issue, but that's not on my behalf. But somebody is asking online when the military compulsory service will be reinstated in Latvia. But let's do it like this: that I would propose to finish in a reverse order, to give each of the speakers the opportunity to respond to the questions, because we have quite good questions, and for each of the speakers, and as we have some 15 minutes, so I would kindly suggest that each of you respond to the questions that were raised in some preferably free or maximum 3.5 minutes. So, Mr. Kulik, let's start with you.
Thank you. About the outcome of debates, very important question. But if we take the trend, the so-called Kudrin camp is now on the rise. So a lot of things would be depend on the foreign environment and so on. During this economic council under the president, he mentioned that for our reforms we need better relations with the outside world. and more comfortable situation. The response of the president was, we don't trade with sovereignty. But this was kind of another thing. But it's, I hope that this trend would increase, in particular that our so-called patriots, they don't have the program. This is only, they don't have a problem. I hope this. I'm not scared about I'm not that scared about NATO. So if I understand about tanks in Latvia, I don't know now about the plans and so on. But when I was in the administration, there were not even the thoughts about this kind of stuff. Please understand that with all my respect, sincere respect to Latvia and to the Baltic states and so on, Ukraine is another problem. And all our actions in Ukraine, we have 3 countries, which quite in this area is very touchy: Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Ukraine. If we have this some kind of a Moldova, no reaction. And I'm not talking about Latvia, particularly Latvia is the member of NATO. In the military, at least in the U.S. military planning, there was a greater than expected threat, which is worse than the worst case analysis. So maybe our military or something, they think about this, but it's not a real thing, and I just completely deny this kind of events. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Scheffler, your answers to the questions first.
Yes, thank you. First of all, because it points into the German question with the question of deterrence, I don't think it's useful to talk about fear, because it's not that you want to inspire fear, because fear causes irrational actions. What you want to change is the cost-benefit calculus, but acting on fear is actually quite dangerous. So with regard to Germany, I don't think there's really much that Russia can still do to change the calculus, because in 2014 it was not clear, is Russia a threat, will Russia remain a threat? Sergey has mentioned that the new white book actually recognizes Russia at least some kind of a threat. So this recognition has been there. The disagreement now is about strategy. And no matter what Russia does, placing a rocket here, placing a rocket there, abrogating the IMF treaty, will lead us out of the basic problem that it will be hard to establish deterrence by denial. It will be hard to arrange for an effective defense of the Baltic countries should Russia, for what reason ever decide to launch a large-scale attack. So I think it is really, from the German perspective, now we have a presence that expresses the solidarity of the alliance with the Baltic states. It makes sure that an attack on one will be an attack on all. But at this point, when we have a large-scale confrontation, it will be in a different realm, and we don't solve it by deploying 1 brigade more, or 2 brigades more, or 3 brigades more. Because due to this difficult position, we will always be outmatched. I mean, there was a survival article by some German authors a couple of months ago, whether we should now start to try to threaten Kaliningrad. But you see in which dimensions you get if you spiral that thought further. So I don't think much can happen to change the German calculus, because it's not anymore about threat perception, but it's about what's actually an effective and durable strategy. And my fear is much more that maybe at some point, and Sergey alluded to it, the Russian side will start acting more friendly and more conciliatory, and that will be when the real threat to the alliance's cohesion arises, when the threat perception diverges again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scheffler. Major General Ratajczak, your answers to the questions?
So a short answer to the question about the name of the third phase of in the history of the alliance. I would call it Touch of Frost. Some of you maybe watched this UK sequel or British sequel, which was called Touch of Frost. But it was about something else. But the name is, I think, suits very well to the phase we are now. As far as the deterrence, I fully agree what Mr. Scheffler said. That to say in the case of Baltic states, there is no place for the deterrence by denial. And it was clearly mentioned in the RAND report, both RAND reports. I mentioned in this from '96, when it was actually sometimes called a report on undefensibility of the Baltic states. And this term was used then. And it was also to say the same sounds more or less in the report from spring this year, when actually the conclusions of this report show clearly that the land forces unit of Baltic countries were unable to conduct withdrawal maneuvers and were destroyed in 60 hours. And so it is, and even if you add some 4 battalions, or actually 3 battalions here, it's simply nothing. So it's why the deterrence must have a different nature. The deterrence must have this what I call a tripwire role. And this it will any action against Baltic states would ignite a full-scale reaction of the alliance, and this is the best way, I mean, to deter any potential enemy. As far as the issue which was raised about the presidential election, the issue which is raised by Mr. Trump is the issue that there is no free lunch for the Europeans, that the Americans are paying actually too much and the Europeans are not paying enough. But this is not something new in the U.S. arguments. I remember Mr. Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, saying in NATO exactly the same, that Americans are paying too much, or there is a over-reliance on the Americans. But in this case, I mean, the candidate is saying this can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Major General. Last but not least, Mr. Garisons, there are quite a questions for you looking forward.
Probably I will start. As General provoked me on RAND again. I think if RAND would conducted simulation in end of 2013, whether Ukraine will be able to defend eastern part of Donbass, certainly RAND would conclude that Russian force would be in Kyiv in 72 hours. And that, I think, the false expectation, and I don't like to spread this kind of Baltic undefensibility. As I said, look on terrain, and therefore what we are doing, we decentralizing, National Guard actually allowed to keep, and they keep weapons at home, and they complete different strategy. You can't apply traditional military planning and just go box against box. That's completely different. Look for what happened in Second World War, how geography matters, and it's really and that is on deterrence. It's deterrence is not about, and I want to actually endorse Alessandro. It's not about scaring. When if you're scaring, then you will be you will have problems. It's about actually preventing miscalculus. It's preventing miscalculus, that your costs will be higher. And once you start, and it's about declaratory policy, everything, about your posture, about everything. You have to be very clear on your intents, and you have to be clear on everything when you will do. And therefore, the Parliament, I hope, is now in discussing our new defense concept, and which this defense concept is very clear on everything that we will do. That is on our part. On preventing incidents and NRC. Well, my understanding, I'm not so old to remember Cold War periods, but I understand that all legal base for actually those rules, how ships should be overflight, and how fighters and ships should communicate they are there, they are not followed. If you want actually to have any kind of incident management, you have to have direct lines of communication. If you convene NRC meeting of ambassadors, well, it might be too late already. It's not the forum where you actually discuss such issues, even all respect to ambassadors. Therefore, you have to find basically incident management, not discussion forum. Then on US elections, I personally would more, if, you know, there's always people say one thing in pre-election campaign, and we have famous one quote from our politician who say, how I can't promise during elections. I should promise everything. Well, we will see, but I more would worry what will happen with the international system, because if the same happens, you know, in NATO, there will be immediate repercussions in whole international system, because this current international system is based on US leadership. And as US withdraws from this leadership, there will be more profound changes as only NATO. And probably NATO will be the smallest piece of this problem. On compulsory service, well, I usually puzzled with those discussions about compulsory service and comparison of Estonia and Lithuania. When I would expect people look, as we say in Latvia, what is inside of teddy bear. And that is bear, sorry. And it's I'm talking about National Guard. In our case, compared to, contrary to Estonia and Lithuania, National Guard is part of armed forces. Even it's probably less trained, but still it's territorial based, and there's enormous enthusiasm and enormous influx of youngsters. And just few days we will have 1 month long boot camp for newcomers, and they will have 3 such boot camps. You have actually formations that can react in few hours, and they have all equipment. You can't do that with your with compulsory service and all reserve system, because that takes time. And we know that actually, if something happens, it will be a surprise for us. Therefore, I would say at this point we should not try to destroy what we have. We have to enhance our National Guard and what we're doing. Otherwise we might end, if we will try to change system right now, we will end with basically with nothing and with no combat ready units. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garisons. Thanks all the panelists. In 2 minutes, the wine will be served, but those 2 minutes will be filled by our director, Mr. Andris Sprūds, for short concluding remarks. Andris, please, the microphone is yours.
I'll take the mic out. Thank you, Māris. I think it's sort of difficult to make some concluding remarks after the very forceful contributions, insightful contributions, and in a dynamic, I think, discussion, but I think there is still many things to discuss. Just a few words from my own side. One, Warsaw is important. Warsaw is symbolic. I mean, Warsaw Summit. First, of course, also Warsaw as a capital and Warsaw as a city, but Warsaw Summit is important. As it was mentioned here, it will be the symbolic, symptomatic in a way what we have achieved, how far we have gone in many ways, how much the alliance has also transformed or developed in many ways, and also in terms of perceptions. At the same time, as it was mentioned here, it's not the end. We say Warsaw, but we think what's beyond. The NATO is like with our capital city, with Riga. Riga is never being built. It's all the time in the process, it's all the time in the making. I think you can say the same about the NATO. NATO is in a permanent making. And the pendulum, as Alessandro also mentioned, might be changing from one side to another side. And this combination also depends on external factors. But it's not just about external factors. let's remember the internal factors within the alliance. There was mentioning of Donald Trump. Next week we have a referendum on Brexit. Let's face it, it's a game changer. It might be the game changer in many ways. Let's hope that we continue our debate also with UK, not just as a NATO member, but also next week still as an EU member. Of course, it will not be next week, but anyway. So the debate is still there. So internal issues are very, very important, how we are, how we define our functions, how we perceive things, what's outside. As for outside, dialogue is important, I guess, and that's why I'm very thankful also to Sergey for coming, because it's always important sort of to see this two to tango, to see what's external environments. Of course, not just about Russia, it's about our partners in Georgia, in Ukraine, and in the southern region. But I think also Russia is very important because many things what have happened is a result of game changer of Russia's annexation of Crimea. But that's why the still dialogue must be there. Some would mention is that cooperative conflict. There is a conflict, there is a tension, but we can still find and look for some cooperation, at least on some areas as well. So it's not our daddy's Cold War. Anyway, so we can draw a conclusion, but we live in a times of uncertainty. As Mr. Ratajczak was mentioning about those phases, I would use Robert Kaplan's comparison. We live in post-historical nirvana. In end of post-historical nirvana. It's not anymore this post-historical nirvana as we might have perceived that geopolitics doesn't matter. Geopolitics are back in many ways. So that's why also the pendulum has also sort of switched to another side. So with these my own thoughts, I finish here, but we had a lot of excellent thoughts here on the table, and I believe also in a coffee break and in a wine session, in informal debates. I am once more very thankful to our partners, to our institutional partners, to NATO, to the Polish Embassy, to the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, very important partners, and we hope that there will be cooperation also in the future and continuation of this debate. Thanks to the speakers, to distinguished speakers for the contribution within NATO and outside of the NATO, and of course, thanks to the audience for coming, participating in such numerous numbers, and it should be continued, not least also in the wine session. Thank you so much.